Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. The first part sounded like it was of someone else. I didn't quite recognize myself. I'd like to thank the Wabash Conservative Union, which, as you pointed out, is a diverse group of open-minded, thoughtful people, for the kind invitation to come on this balmy, pleasant, summery evening to Crawfordsville. I accepted on the condition that I would get a tour of the Goodrich Room. As mentioned, I am actually a fan of Pierre. I did learn it's Pierre and not Pierre Goodrich, and of what he's accomplished with the Liberty Fund, which is a very important organization. I was at the Liberty Fund conference in Hong Kong with Chinese scholars, and the promotion of open civil discourse and conversation, which the point of the conversation is the conversation. It's not to trick you into joining a movement or a cause or a party, but to have an honest exchange of views in a civil context. So thank you very much for making that possible. It's something I wanted to get around to, but somehow I never ended up in Crawfordsville, and now I had the opportunity to do so. Before talking about what I think might be the main theme, which is things I've learned in the course of my life that were not obvious to me when I started out, but that I learned through experience and exchange with others, I thought I'd talk a little bit first about the nature of libertarian ideas and how I understand them. First, a clarification. The term libertarian is used to describe a set of ideas that in most of the rest of the world would be called liberal, or whatever is the equivalent in that language. Because of a kind of series of political accidents, if you will, in the United States, the term liberal came to have a very different meaning from what it had meant earlier on, and what it means in most countries in the rest of the world. If you call yourself a liberal in Germany, people understand that you believe in limited government, you believe in toleration, you believe in respect for individual rights, you believe in peace, you believe in free markets, free trade, and the protection of property. In the United States, it means something a little bit different. We think about people such as the late Senator Kennedy or various philosophers who in Europe would certainly not be called liberals. They would probably be called social democrats or socialists. And that's a different political tradition with its heroes, its great thinkers, and so on, but it's not really the same as liberalism. So I may just use the term liberal in various contexts. I hope people understand I'm using it in the way that most of the human race, when they talk about these ideas, uses it. Americans are unusual in this regard. And you can think about a political tradition of thought in a lot of different ways. You can think about it historically. I would say that liberalism emerges as a reaction in the early modern period to the rise of the absolute state, the idea that the king or the state is above the law. And the doctrine of sovereignty in political science is emerging at the same time, that the sovereign power is that power or authority within a polity that is the final ultimate decision maker and above which there can be no appeal. And the implicit thesis there is that the sovereign power is above the law. Royal absolutism, which is normally presented as an ancient doctrine, I hope not at this college, not in your history department, but most of the population of the United States gets their views, I'm convinced, about history from the cartoons on Saturday morning. That's why you probably find most people believe dinosaurs and people lived at the same time. They've seen the Flintstones, and it's sort of obvious that they coexisted, but they also believe something like the following, which I call the Saturday morning cartoon view of political history. In the old days, the ancient time, there was the divine right of kings. And then, I don't know, something happened and we got democracy and civil rights, some stuff happened. And now here we are. That's it. So the ancient doctrine is a divine right of kings. Modern doctrine is something called democracy. That's almost backward, almost. The divine right of kings, or the doctrine of absolute power and absolutism, is a modern doctrine. There's neither ancient nor medieval. That's another term that is frequently misused. I recall Madeleine Albright, speaking at the United Nations, describing the Taliban regime and the Islamic Republic of Iran as medieval institutions. Nothing could be further from the truth. These are not medieval institutions. The idea of an Islamic republic is a modern idea, which is a melange of fantasies about Islamic history that no serious Muslim historian believes, fantasies about the four rightly guided caliphs, and contemporary 20th century fascist ideology from Europe, which ended up in this melange that's called Islamicism. And there's nothing medieval or ancient or even particularly Islamic about these political institutions. So we could understand historically that when states began to emerge, modern standing armies, professionalized bureaucracies, emerging state control of religion after the so-called Protestant Reformation, that liberalism begins to emerge as a reaction to that, to defend the concept of the rule of law, or the supremacy of law, and older doctrines that everyone is subject to the law. These are much older ideas. In the process, they radicalized them, if you will, clarified them, brought them to greater articulation. Some of the great figures we could think about in this context would be the English levelers during the period of the English civil wars, who articulated an incredibly robust, radical, if you will, libertarian, liberal doctrine of individual rights, freedom of conscience, limited constitutional government, and so on. It had an enormous impact on the political culture that was emerging in the American colonies as well. John Locke does not cite any leveler documents, but his language is quite obviously influenced by it. He had many leveler pamphlets in his library, and a whole tradition that defends the idea of the supremacy of law against the arbitrary power of the king. We could think of other ways to understand the emergence of liberalism. I'll give you one that I find very helpful, not the only one, by the way, but one useful, is conceptually, to look at the key concepts of this way of looking at the world and how they interact with each other. And I would identify three, and each one gives a kind of strength to the other two, such that any one of them might not be very compelling, but together they form a stable system of ideas, much as if we had a chair. You'll see what a tremendous artist I am in a moment. We have a chair